You know that exact feeling when you're like just scrolling on your phone, minding your own business, and you happen to stop on one of those viral wildlife videos?
Oh, yeah. The algorithm loves those.
Right. You click play, and suddenly you are completely frozen. You're holding your breath, watching a predator silently stalk its prey. You hear the roar, you see the bite, the frantic chase through the brush.
It's intense.
It really is. You get that massive spike of adrenaline, and then, a few seconds later, you just keep scrolling. But if you are listening to this right now, I want you to ask yourself, have you ever actually stopped and wondered what is truly going on beneath the surface of that chaos?
It is remarkably easy to just get lost in the spectacle of it all. I mean, the blood, the dust, the dramatic music, someone edited over the clip. But what we often miss is that there is a silent, completely invisible rule book dictating every single micro movement in those encounters.
Like nothing happens by accident.
Exactly. Nothing you see in the wild happens by accident.
And that is our mission for today's deep dive. We have gathered a really fascinating stack of sources for you today. It's a collection of raw, unscripted wildlife encounters captured on camera by people out in the field. But we are not just here to gawk at animal attacks like it's some summer blockbuster action movie.
No, definitely not.
We are going to extract the hidden rules of survival, the behavioral science, and honestly, some truly bizarre interspecies diplomacy hiding inside these intense moments.
Because every single jaw-dropping moment we're going to unpack today happens for a very specific, deeply ingrained evolutionary reason.
Right.
Whether it's a massive predator suddenly giving up on a hunt or a severely injured animal just refusing to die, I want to dive into the why and the how behind what, to the untrained eye, looks like total wilderness anarchy.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the classic narrative we all grew up with is always big, scary predator eats helpless little prey.
Right, that's the trope, yeah.
But the footage we're analyzing today completely shatters that assumption.
Okay.
Let's take the female mallard duck from our sources. She is on the ground, fiercely fending off a hawk to protect her nest. And my immediate first thought watching this was, wait a minute, you are a bird?
Right.
You have wings? Why on earth are you building a nest on the ground where literally everything can eat you?
It does seem completely counterintuitive at first glance. But, well, you have to look at the anatomy of the animal and the evolutionary trade-offs they've made. Mallards have webbed feet.
Oh, of course, for swimming.
Exactly. That makes them incredibly efficient aquatic navigators. They can paddle, dive, and swim with incredible speed. But the trade-off for those paddles is that they are entirely inadequate for gripping branches.
So they can't just perch.
No, they physically cannot land on a high branch and weave a nest up in the safety of a tree canopy like, say, a robin or a blue jay. So they are forced into a compromise. They have to camouflage their nests in dense vegetation right on the dirt.
Which obviously puts them right in the line of fire for ground predators, snakes, and birds of prey, like that hawk swooping in.
It does. But let's look at how biology compensates for that. It's a calculated risk. Their chicks are what evolutionary biologists call precocial.
Precocial, meaning what exactly?
It means they're born relatively mature and highly mobile. Unlike a helpless, bland baby bird in a china that needs weeks of feeding, mallard chicks hatch with downy feathers and open eyes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and just hours after hatching, those chicks abandon the nest entirely and head straight for the refuge of the water. So the mother only has to hold the line on the ground, fighting off hawks and foxes for a very, very short window of time.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. She's just buying time. But the concept of holding the line takes on a wildly different meaning when we look at the next piece of footage.
Oh, the buffalo.
Well, first, the tiger. We have this massive tiger ambushing a sambar deer by a muddy lake. It is a desperate, violent struggle, but the deer manages to break free and scrambles into the deeper water. And the tiger, it just stops.
It just gives up.
It literally turns around and walks away. Now contrast that with another video we have. Two massive African buffaloes fighting on a dirt road. One of the buffaloes has severely injured its front knees. I mean, it is dragging itself across the dirt, literally crawling on its broken knees to keep fighting its rival.
It's hard to watch.
It really is. I watched that and thought of a battered boxer who is bleeding, concussed, and just refuses to stay down on the mat. So here is what I don't get. Why does an apex predator like a tiger walk away from a week's worth of food so easily, while a half-crippled buffalo fights to the absolute bitter end?
To understand that, you have to look at the brutal mathematics of energy and the specific stakes of each fight. Let's look at the tiger first. For a predator, hunting is an economic transaction. The tiger's brain is constantly calculating energy expenditure versus caloric reward. Water creates massive physical drag, meaning the tiger would have to burn double the energy to pursue the deer in the lake while losing its leverage for a killing bite.
Plus, fighting in water is just risky, right?
Very risky. If a tiger gets injured during a messy, prolonged hunt, even just a deep scratch that gets infected, it loses its ability to hunt tomorrow.
Wow.
In the wild, a minor injury for a solitary predator is a slow death sentence by starvation. So the moment the deer gets into the water and the equation flips to being high risk and low reward, the tiger's instincts immediately override its hunger and tell it to cut its losses.
So the tiger taps out because it's playing the long game, but the buffalo doesn't have a long game if it loses.
That is the core difference. The tiger is fighting for a meal. The buffalo is fighting for absolute genetic dominance or its very life. There's zero room for economic calculation when the stakes are existential.
Right.
Let's build on your boxer analogy. A boxer can tap out, take a loss on their record, and go home to their family. If a buffalo displays weakness and submits, it is permanently exiled from the breeding pool, or it is immediately killed by predators who target the weak.
So it's literally do or die.
Exactly. That buffalo dragging itself on its knees isn't acting out of human bravery or pride. It is running on pure, unadulterated biological imperative. The pain signals from its knees are being entirely suppressed by adrenaline because the alternative to fighting is immediate evolutionary elimination.
That shift in perspective, from a calculating, almost robotic predator to a prey animal running on pure desperation, is intense. But what really surprised me in these sources is that danger doesn't just come from entirely different species. Often, the most violent battles were happening within an animal's own family.
Yeah, interspecies conflict is often the most ruthless dynamic in the wild, largely because they're fighting over the exact same resources and mating rights.
Ruthless doesn't even begin to cover it. We have this footage from Kenya of a dominant lion father violently expelling his own son from the pride.
That clip is wild.
The father is hyper-aggressive, roaring at a deafening volume, and the young lion is completely submissive, cowering, and just being forced out into the wilderness to forge his own path. I think we all grew up with this very sanitized, animated movie idea of the animal kingdom family unit.
The whole circle of life thing.
Right. But if strength is in numbers, why would a pride kick out a healthy, capable young fighter? Aren't these animals supposed to look out for their own? Doesn't that weaken the family?
What's fascinating here is that it seems like it would weaken them, but the mechanism at play is vital for the long-term survival of the species. This isn't about parental cruelty. This is about enforcing hierarchy and preventing genetic bottlenecking, specifically inbreeding.
Oh, of course.
Right, because if the young males were allowed to stay, they would eventually mate with their sisters or aunts. By aggressively forcing the submissive young males out, the dominant father forces genetic dispersal.
So they have to go find a new territory.
Exactly. Those young lions have to wander, survive the harshest conditions, and eventually take over a completely different pride. This ensures that only the strongest, most resilient individuals get to establish territories and mix their genes into a new pool.
And it is an incredibly tough world out there for those ousted kids once they lose their security detail. We see another clip of a young lone lion who is already nursing an injured paw from one of these territorial disputes, getting charged by a massive elephant.
Yeah, he barely gets away.
Barely escapes being trampled in the last second. And as a side note, the sources mention that local wildlife authorities were actually called in to provide veterinary care for that lion, hoping he recovers enough to continue his lineage.
Which is pretty rare.
It is, but it really goes to show the whole King of the Jungle title goes out the window the second you are alone and injured.
A lone lion is incredibly vulnerable. Without the backing of the pride to help bring down large prey or defend territory, desperation sets in quickly. But, that same desperation for territory is what drives some of the most incredible behavioral and biological adaptations we see in nature.
Which brings us to the impala. This entirely blew my mind. We have this footage of a male impala during the April and May rutting season. And instead of making normal deer sounds, it is emitting this deep, guttural, vibrating noise that sounds virtually identical to a roaring lion.
It's so strange to hear.
It's a massive vocal fake out. I was trying to contextualize this, and I realized it's basically the animal equivalent of a homeowner putting up a fake beware of dog sign or like a dummy security camera on their front porch to scare off burglars.
That's a good comparison. Let's push that analogy further, though, because there's a biological cost here that a plastic yard sign doesn't have. The timing, as you mentioned, is the rutting season, the absolute peak of reproductive competition in the African savanna. The males are highly aggressive and fighting for the right to mate. By mimicking the deep, threatening acoustic frequency of an apex predator, the impala is projecting an illusion of immense size and danger to ward off competing males before a physical fight even happens.
It's all about intimidation.
Yes, but here is the catch. Producing a sound at that frequency requires a massive expansion of the larynx and burns significant energy reserves. Furthermore, if that bluff is called, say, an actual alpha male lion hears that roar and comes looking for a turf war, that impala is instantly dead.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it is a biologically expensive, highly dangerous bluff. But the drive to secure mating rights makes the risk worthwhile.
So what does this all mean when we take all of these highly tuned, incredibly specific evolutionary behaviors and throw human beings into the mix? Because up until now, we've been talking about animals playing by the rules of the pure wilderness.
Which is a very fragile system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so much of our source material focuses on the chaotic intersection where these wild instincts crash directly into our modern environments.
This is where the behavioral science gets incredibly messy. We are constantly blurring the boundaries between our domesticated, engineered world and their wild one. And frankly, the wildlife doesn't have the evolutionary software to process our infrastructure.
It really exposes our completely false sense of security. Let's look at the Masai Mara Reserve. We have footage of illegal cattle grazing happening right in the middle of lion territory. The cattle naturally attract a pack of hungry lionesses, which is a powder keg of a situation on its own.
A huge conflict waiting to happen.
And then you have these massive safari vehicles full of tourists awkwardly maneuvering and interfering with the natural hunt. The cars are literally blocking the lions' pursuit paths, totally disrupting the cycle, all while leopards are just watching the chaos from the trees.
What you're seeing there is the disruption of millions of years of spatial adaptation. Native predators map their hunting strategies based on the topography of the land, where the brush is, where the water is.
And cars aren't part of that map?
Not at all. Safari vehicles act as massive, unpredictable physical barriers that move and smell strange. The animals haven't evolved to navigate around a line of idling diesel trucks during a high-speed pursuit. The tourists inside might think they are just passive, invisible observers looking through a camera lens, but their physical presence actively degrades the predator's ability to feed themselves.
We really do act like we're watching them on television, safely behind a screen. But we are physically in their living room. And speaking of feeling safe behind screens, let's talk about the footage of the puma. We have a video of a wild puma just calmly staring through a sliding glass door right into someone's house. It was specifically attracted by the smell of domestic pets, and it is standing there, locking eyes with a cat scratcher inside the living room. It's wild to think that as humans, we honestly believe a quarter-inch pane of melted sand separates us from the top of the food chain.
We rely entirely on our modern architecture to feel invulnerable. But to a puma's sensory processing, a glass door isn't a force field or a boundary. It's just a strange, transparent obstacle standing between it and a highly concentrated source of protein.
Which is terrifying.
It is. The urban invasion into big cat habitats brings their hyper-tuned sensory abilities, their sense of smell, their night vision, right to our patios. You mentioned the illusion of safety with the glass. Another detail in the source is highlighted bear claws, which can grow up to 10 centimeters long and effortlessly tear through the metal door of a car to get to a candy bar.
Just ripping through metal.
Yeah. When you look at the material reality of a predator's anatomy versus the materials we build our homes and cars with, you realize our barriers are psychological, not physical.
We saw that exact psychological barrier get crushed when an elephant absolutely shattered a car's windshield into pieces just because the driver got too close on a dirt road. The elephant just gently leaned in and reminded them who actually commands the physics of that terrain.
An incredible display of power.
And it isn't just the multi-ton giants putting us in our place. We have footage of a coastal invasion of baboons where this one incredibly brazen primate completely ignores the shouting beachgoers, marches right up to their picnic blankets to steal their food, and a guy literally has to fend the animal off by swinging a heavy boat oar at it.
The baboon footage touches on a critical psychological blind spot humans have. We operate under the assumption that by bringing animals into our spaces or by paving roads into theirs, they will naturally adapt to our social contracts and rules.
Like they're just going to respect the picnic blanket.
Exactly. But domesticating an environment, putting down a picnic blanket or paving a road, never erases the millions of years of primal instinct hardwired into the local fauna.
Which perfectly explains the terrifying situation with the pet lion in our sources. This was a lion raised from a tiny cub by humans, living inside a house, bottle-fed, completely domesticated in theory. Yet it exhibited such intense, hardwired hunting behaviors towards its owner that the owner actually had to physically intervene and wrestle the animal to stop a full-blown attack.
Yeah, that's a very dangerous misconception.
I mean, if you raise it with love, shouldn't it act with love?
It's a romantic idea, but it fundamentally misunderstands neuroscience. You can hand-rear an apex predator from birth, but you cannot hand-rear the predator out of the animal's DNA. The software is hard-coded. Biologists call these fixed action patterns.
Fixed action patterns, so it's automatic.
Entirely. When that lion's prey drive is triggered by a specific stimulus, say the owner turning their back and walking away quickly, the lion's brain automatically executes a motor sequence: stalk, chase, and bite. In that split second, the lion's brain isn't consulting its memories of you bottle feeding it. It is simply executing a genetic command that it literally cannot consciously stop.
It is terrifying, but also deeply fascinating that they are basically passengers to their own instincts. But nature isn't entirely a horror show of bloody battles, smashed windshields, and swinging boat oars. Here's where it gets really interesting. There is this bizarre, quiet diplomacy out there that seems to defy all the ruthless logic we just talked about.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the rare moments of tolerance in the wild are arguably just as revealing about evolutionary biology as the moments of extreme violence.
I was absolutely captivated by the footage of the black-headed vulture and the caracara. For context, these are two bird species that are natural, direct competitors. They fight over the exact same food sources on the ground. But in this video, they were caught high up in the treetops, mutually and gently cleaning each other's feathers.
It's a great piece of footage.
I looked at this and thought, it's like two rival corporate CEOs who spend all day trying to aggressively bankrupt each other, suddenly sharing a cab across town, and straightening each other's ties before they walk into a hostile board meeting. How does a truce like this even evolve between enemies?
The CEO analogy is actually a great starting point. But let's imagine those CEOs are only sharing that cab because they both have a severe parasitic infection that they need each other to cure before the meeting.
Oh, gross. Okay.
Right. In nature, mutual benefit can occasionally override the baseline competitive instinct.
Yeah.
Ectoparasites, ticks, and mites are a major threat to the health of both these birds. Up in the canopy, they are physically removed from the immediate trigger of a carcass on the ground.
So they aren't fighting over food in that moment.
Exactly. Without the food source right in front of them to trigger their competitive aggression, a behavioral switch flips. They temporarily engage in cross-species social grooming because the immediate hygienic benefit of having parasites removed from hard-to-reach places far outweighs their general instinct to fight. It's not friendship. It is a highly calculated, temporary, hygienic alliance.
It's a truce of pure convenience. I love that. But if that is calculated, what about sheer, unexplainable audacity? Because the sources also showed footage of a tiny guard dog throwing itself directly into a violent physical confrontation between two massive bulls.
Yeah, it's the farm dog.
These bulls weigh literally 10 times what the dog does, and the dog is just agilely darting between their hooves, barking, trying to force them apart. It makes no mathematical sense for that dog to risk its life.
Well, that dog is a perfect example of artificial selection, completely overriding natural self-preservation. Over centuries, humans have selectively bred guard dogs to protect and manage livestock. We have artificially amplified their instinct to maintain order in the herd to such a degree that it is now overwhelmingly stronger than their baseline survival instinct.
So they don't even see the danger.
A wild wolf would evaluate those bulls, realize the risk of being crushed is too high, and walk away, much like our tiger earlier. The guard dog's genetic software has been rewritten by humans to ignore the danger and focus solely on herd management.
It's just sheer bred-in willpower.
Speaking of sheer willpower, we absolutely have to talk about the sloth, because out of everything we reviewed, this might be my favorite detail.
The sloth is a brilliant counterpoint to everything else we've discussed. We have this clip where a sloth gets knocked out of a tree by a rival during a territorial dispute. It falls and hits the ground hard. And now, because of its biology, it is facing a painfully slow, literally days-long journey just to climb back up the trunk to exact its revenge on the rival. I mean, why even be a sloth? Why evolve to be that slow in a world where speed equals survival?
It's a stark contrast to the high-speed, high-adrenaline chaos we usually associate with wild encounters. But you have to understand why a slow metabolism is an evolutionary advantage in the first place.
Okay, I'm listening.
A sloth's incredibly slow metabolic rate allows it to survive on a diet of toxic, low-calorie leaves that no other animal in the rainforest can digest or even wants to eat. By lowering its energy requirements to almost zero, it avoids competing for food entirely.
So it just taps out of the rat race.
Exactly. But the trade-off is that its reality is dictated by that metabolism. It cannot rush. Its territorial reclamation, its revenge, as you put it, will be executed at a microscopic pace.
That is so funny to think about.
But make no mistake, the neurological drive to return to its domain and confront that rival is just as intense and biologically urgent as the buffalo dragging itself on its broken knees. It's just happening in slow motion.
So, if we pull all of these threads together for you, the listener, what we are ultimately looking at when we scroll past these videos is not just random, chaotic animal clips. This footage proves that nature is a highly complex, incredibly high-stakes theater.
It really is.
It's driven by the harsh mathematics of calorie economics, ruthless internal family politics, and these totally surprising moments of calculated tolerance and sheer stubbornness.
Every single action, whether it's an impala faking a roar or a vulture picking a tick off an enemy, is a calculated bet on survival. And I think observing it this closely strips away a lot of the romanticized, sanitized views we hold about the natural world, and more importantly, our own place within it.
It really does. And I want to leave you with one final lingering image from these sources to chew on before we go. We saw this incredible footage of thousands of wild beasts blindly throwing themselves down a steep, incredibly deadly bank into the churning Mara River.
A really chaotic scene.
It is a desperate, chaotic race driven purely by an unseen herd instinct. If the one in front jumps, they all jump, even to their deaths. And right after that, we saw langur monkeys casually defying gravity, turning the vertical, lethal cliffs of Cheongju into an acrobatic playground.
Two entirely different relationships with a deadly cliff edge. One is driven by blind, uncontrollable herd panic, and the other by masterful, conscious adaptation to the environment.
And it makes you wonder about us. What metaphorical cliffs or rivers are we humans blindly launching ourselves off of today? What unseen primal herd instincts are currently driving our modern society, our economics, our politics, all while we sit in our temperature-controlled glass houses, pretending we've somehow evolved completely past the wild? Next time you click play on a viral wildlife video, remember, we might just be watching our own reflections.
A deeply compelling thought to end our analysis on.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.